tonight we're debating Trump versus Biden, and we're starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. This is going to be a fun one, folks, a very special one. And want to let you know, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a nonpartisan debate platform. And we have debates on politics, science, and religion. And want to let you know, no matter what walk of life you're from, we totally welcome you here. We're glad you're here. We hope you have a great time. And with that, I'm going to give you some of the details about the debate, but want to mention, if this is your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button as we have many more debates to come. So, for example, on Monday, our good friend Oliver Janich will be debating Vosh on climate change. So that should be a lot of fun. Tune in for that. And for tonight, we are going to have a fairly flexible format. You could say 10 to 12 minutes or so for the opening statements. Could be even shorter than that, up to the speaker. Then we will be having about 50 to 60 minutes of open dialogue, and then Q&A for about 30 minutes. So if you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. If you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, makes it easier for me to get every question in that Q&A list to try to work through during that Q&A. Super Chat is also an option, in which case it'll push your question to the top of the list. And also, want to let you know, I'm going to give a quick introduction to the speakers, as well as ask if they'd be willing to share about what you can find at their links, which are conveniently already down there in the description box waiting for you right now, folks. So we'll start with Dr. Ben Burgis. We are very excited to have you here, Ben. Thanks so much for joining us. And want to let you know, folks, so he is a philosopher, you could say philosophy professor, Philosopher Synonymous, and also has his own podcast. And you've seen him in many places on YouTube as well. So welcome. Thanks so much, Ben, for being here. And what can people expect to find at your link?
Thanks for having me, James. So they can find the podcast, which is called Give Them an Argument, and it's also on YouTube, premieres on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. And they can also find links to what I've written in Jacobin, where I've got a regular column, and I don't know, miscellaneous stuff. I forgot what all I put there.
You bet. Thanks so much. And we will kick it over to Mr. Reagan, who is a popular YouTuber who defends Donald Trump and that gives me an opportunity. I want to let you know, folks, that though Mr. Reagan is a legit Trump backer, big time Trump. However, I have to clarify, as Ben said, he would take this debate, but he's not really a Biden guy. So he said, hey, if it's kind of a lesser of two evils kind of debate, he's like, I'm not a Trump guy, that's for sure. And so basically, I want to let you know that that's kind of where the two angles of where each of our speakers will come tonight. And so with that, though, Mr. Reagan, thrilled to have you here. What can people expect to find at your link?
Well, you could just go to my YouTube channel and you'll find hilarious and brilliant videos that everyone will love. Fun for the whole family.
Thanks so much. Excited to have you guys here. And with that, we will get it started for tonight. You know, I never actually, in the discussion as we set this up, I never asked who would like to go first. Does anybody have a preference on who would like to go first?
I actually don't mind, but since Ben went first last time, I can do him a favor and just present him with my basic argument first if he likes.
Up to you.
Okay, since I'm the stronger supporter of one of the candidates.
Yeah, makes sense.
I also would like to say that I brought a special weapon, secret weapon, Ben. You ready for this?
All right, let's do it.
Boom. Ooh. See that? 30% smarter right here.
Yeah.
So it says that from the science, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're in trouble. No, I'm not actually going to wear those because that's silly.
Yeah, no.
I have 20/20 vision.
I remember when Rick Perry did that.
Did he really?
No, he ran for president twice, and the second time he was wearing like he'd started wearing glasses.
Well, don't lack respect just because I don't have the glasses. All right, we're taking those off.
Hey, I'll take mine off. That's fine.
Oh no, you can wear them. It's all good. All right, let's see here. I would just like to start out by saying this: Trump is the best possible president in 2020. not for conservatives, for literally everyone. All right. People say he's divisive. He's not divisive. If you look at all of his accomplishments, right, if you actually read his policy measures, the things that he has signed, he's not even really right wing. He's totally moderate. If anything, he might be considered a little bit left politically. Why is he considered far right wing? He's considered far right wing because of slurs, because of slander and libel from the left wing media, primarily CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, these kind of places, because they don't like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not an establishment guy. Donald Trump is not a far leftist. He does not help push forward the progressive ideas that a lot of reporters and people think are really great, right? But let's look through a couple of things. These are just a few things that I listed real quick right before the show. I didn't put them all up. He's essentially created peace in the Middle East. You'll probably debate me on that. You'll probably think that that's not 100% true, but he has done more to establish peace in the Middle East than like any other president. All of his international policies have been amazing. He's de-escalated tensions with North Korea. He's done a fantastic job on that front, which all leftists up until the time of Trump thought was a good idea. Now suddenly, oh, we're not so sure. We don't really want to talk about that. He made CBD and hemp legal, right? That's something a lot of leftists should love. He fixed the water in Flint. His EPA fixed the water in Flint. That was something everybody's screaming about. Then he went and fixed that. Trump is a doer, right? He's a businessman, and he goes in and he doesn't say, let's bring in a committee to figure out how to do this. He just says, what's the best way to do it? He gets some experts. What's the best way to do it? Okay, let's figure out a plan to implement that. And then he actually does it. He does things so much faster and so much more effectively than like any other president probably ever, that you cannot deny he's effective. If you don't like his policies, okay, you can't deny he's effective. But then if you look at what he's done, he signed into law a law that gave pharmacists the legal right to properly advise patients. We can get FOSTA and SESTA helped fight sex trafficking. Let's see here. Because of his economy before coronavirus, Americans were getting a 4.5% income boost. There's 13 million acres of wilderness that have been expanded to national parks. He's designated a lot of land as wilderness. So, environmentalists should love him. He deregulated prescription drug imports from Canada. So drug prices have dropped 11% under Trump. He created parental leave for federal employees. These are all left-wing things that leftists have always said that they've always wanted, and they've never been able to get under any president, including Obama, including Bill Clinton. He created the First Step Act that aimed to help Black Americans, in the judicial system. He increased funding for historically Black colleges by like an insane amount, which, by the way, I don't like any of the stuff that is specifically targeted to race, helping specific races. I don't like that. I feel like that divides us as a country, but the left always loves that. They always think we need to give Black people more stuff. Well, Trump's definitely done that. And there was another thing called the Platinum Plan that he just put in place. That's pretty crazy. Trump ordered an initiative to decriminalize homosexuality in every country around the world. The weird thing about all this is that you've probably never heard of most of those things, right? Because the media does not talk about his more sort of like left-leaning accomplishments because they want you to think that he's far right. It's not Trump that divides the country. If we treated Trump fairly in the media, he would be the least divisive president in history. He would bring the country together, but he's not. They don't report on him appropriately. Now let's turn to Biden. Biden is incompetent. Biden can barely form coherent sentences most of the time. And I have that problem a little bit too, but I'm not running for president right now. Maybe one day, in which time I'll have to deal with that myself. But I think that it's a huge mistake. And I think most people think it's a mistake to bring in somebody who has trouble formulating sentences, forgets what he's talking about. And the truth is, we don't exactly know who we're voting for on the left, because if he does prove to be incompetent, he's going to have to be replaced, probably by Kamala at first. But who's going to control her, or who's going to control him if he's not replaced? Nancy Pelosi came out talking about the 25th Amendment and how this isn't really about Trump and how we got to look at potentially how to make sure our president is competent and this kind of thing. Well, that could also apply to Biden. She could be trying to sweep the leg once Biden gets into office and take over herself. Pelosi, as we know, is all about power, right? She's, you had the whole Russian collusion nonsense that she's talked about how, Trump needs to step down and then Pence needs to step down if he has coronavirus so she can take power. I mean, the left is so much about power. You cannot give power to people who desperately want it this much because they will inevitably be corrupt. And we can't have the Green New Deal. We can't have that kind of stuff. So we can't have the far left take over because that'll bankrupt the country. We can't put in Marxist policies. And I know that you are a Marxist, so, and you can correct me if that's wrong, but Marxism is about power and it's about destruction, right? You got to destroy what exists so that you can build up, a Marxist, excuse me. Hey, buddy. All right. I gotta figure out a way to shut him up. I didn't bring any toys. That's unfortunate. It's about destroying the country and building up a Marxist empire in the ashes of the old, in the ashes of the destroyed nation that, what is left after they raze everything. This is not a strategy I think Americans actually want. I don't think it's good for anybody. Marxism destroys incentives. It destroys opportunities for success, for growth. But Trump had proved in the first, 3.5, 4 years that he is the best possible president for 2020. Now, after coronavirus, obviously there was a big dip, but he will bring the economy back. That's what he does really, really well. He will make it a V-shaped economy. I think that what will help is after the left-wing governors, left-wing mayors of this country open everything up after the election, because I think that's really what's holding them back. I think that they have a problem with opening everything up because they know that will rejuvenate the economy and that'll help Trump get elected. And so they're resisting that. But I think as soon as the election's over, whether it's Trump or Biden, everything's going to open up. Things are going to get a lot better pretty dang quickly. But I think Trump is the best person to manage that recovery. Definitely not Joe Biden. All right, that's my pitch. Primarily that Trump is not an extreme right-wing candidate, that he is a moderate and he brings people together.
Thanks so much. We'll kick it over to Ben for his opening statement. The floor is all yours. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thank you, James. So I would say that there are, you'll be shocked to hear several things that we just heard that I don't think are right. But I do want to focus on what you said before Chris's opening statement, which is that, of course, as should surprise exactly no one, I'm not a huge supporter of Joe Biden, to put it mildly. I tried very, very, very hard to get somebody else nominated instead. I'm actually, I don't know why we're talking about Marxism when we're talking about a spineless gray blur of a corporate centrist like Joe Biden. But
Fair.
Whatever you think about that. Marxism, and there are a lot of interesting claims that were just made about that, but Marxism is not on the ballot. Trump and Biden are on the ballot. And if you care about the well-being of the American working class, then I think this is a no-brainer. Biden is not certainly anybody I would see as a friend ideologically. I think he stands in the way of all kinds of things that we desperately need, especially during the COVID crisis, like national health insurance. But I think that Trump has been an absolute disaster in those terms. So in 2016, he lied. He said he was a different kind of Republican. He said he wouldn't cut entitlements. He said he was pro-worker. He went to places like Youngstown and Lordstown, Ohio, where post-industrial dislocation has caused dystopian levels of misery. And he promised that he would bring the jobs back. In fact, he told people not to sell their homes because when he was elected, the jobs were coming back. That hasn't happened. There have been modest increases in some industrial jobs because the slow recovery that was happening throughout the Obama administration accelerated under Trump. We can talk a little bit more about why that is, but there's certainly been no boom of new industrial jobs. The mass layoffs at GM's Lordstown plant in Ohio, where Trump went and told people not to sell their houses in 2016, weren't reversed. In fact, the opposite happened. It shut down production entirely in 2019. The steel mills certainly didn't come back to Youngstown, a city I've visited many, many times since my mom grew up there and my grandparents lived there until they died, and some of my relatives are still there. I've been to Youngstown well into the Trump era, and it's still a hellscape of heroin addiction and shuttered storefronts. Did the coal plants come back to West Virginia now that Trump ended that supposed war on coal? Well, as of February 2019, more than 2 years into Trump's presidency and before his catastrophic mishandling of the COVID crisis destroyed the economy, the number of coal jobs in West Virginia was at a historic low, thousands less than there were at any time during the Obama administration. And of course, let's remember why people in those places wanted so desperately for those industrial jobs to come back. It's not because steelworkers in Youngstown liked working at steel mills and breathing industrial pollutants all day, every day that gave so many of them lung cancer. It's not because auto workers in Lordstown liked working in the noisy and dangerous conditions of an auto plant. My dad worked at a plant like that for a little while in Lansing, Michigan in the early 70s, and he still has a scar from an industrial accident. That's not inherently more fun or more rewarding work than working at a grocery store or a restaurant. The reason the loss of those jobs that Trump got so much mileage by lying and saying he was going to bring back was so traumatic was that they were unionized. It's not a law of nature that so-called unskilled line workers at an auto plant in Lordstown or a steel mill in Youngstown made so much more money and have so many more benefits than their equivalents at Walmart and McDonald's. It's 100% due to the UAW and the United Steelworkers. So let's talk about labor. The Trump administration has been a relentless enemy of labor. His appointees to the National Labor Relations Board have gutted protections for working people, overturning precedent after precedent from the Obama administration and before, always, in every case, literally every case, at the expense of labor and in the interests of bosses. Labor law is worse for the working class now than it's been at any point since the Great Depression. He made it harder for unions to get information about about how to join to workers in non-unionized workplaces. He's made it harder for shop stewards to help workers with grievances in unionized workplaces. He's made it harder for new unions to be recognized in the first place and for old unions to negotiate for better wages and working conditions. He's bragged about the wage increases for low-wage workers in the first few years pre-COVID, but what Trump supporters won't tell you is that most of that increase has nothing to do with anything he's done. It's a result, this is not me, this is the National Employment Law Project saying this, of 26 states raising the minimum wage in the last few years. Where's Trump been on that? He opposed efforts by House Democrats to raise the federal minimum wage after flip-flopping a bunch of times. And of course, with regard to the poorest and most desperate working class people, he's done a lot worse than that. Workers and their families who fled to the United States from Mexico and point south, willing to take terrible jobs in dirty and dangerous conditions because they were fleeing from grinding poverty and cartel violence, have been rounded up outside their churches, outside their children's schools, at their jobs, in the streets. And some of this started under the Obama administration. Hey, I'm a Bernie guy. I'm not an Obama or Biden apologist. But the plain fact is that it's gotten far worse under Trump. Including absolute horrors and international embarrassments and human rights abuses like the Trump child separation policy. And if anybody tries to tell you that the motivation for this brutal and inhuman war against immigrant workers has been a desire to keep up the wage levels of American workers, remember all that stuff I just said about the Trump administration's labor policy and don't believe it. Now, it is true. What the counter always is, we heard a little bit of this in Chris's opening statement, is, oh, before COVID, the Trump economy was so good. You know, there were more jobs. Well, at that point, there were a couple of possible explanations that you might believe of that. One explanation was that you'd had a recovery that had been going frustratingly slowly, but going for several years already, and that it was picking up steam around that time, and that Trump was in the right place at the right time. But that wasn't the only explanation. You know, it might have been plausible at one point that the reason was that Trump was just so awesome at doing things that would result in the creation of jobs, that, you know, that he was just such a good expert custodian of the economy. Well, at this point, we know that's not true because his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has been, I think, criminally negligent is the most generous thing that you can call it. mass murder by neglect would be a little bit more accurate. It's one of the absolute worst performances with regard to the virus on the entire planet, literally in terms of new cases and deaths per thousand. One of the very worst, like as part of a, there are countries that are worse, but it's a very short list, and they tend to be governed by Trump type right-wing demagogues with authoritarian tendencies. People like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, etc. Right? So, of course, this makes it impossible to turn around the economic devastation that's caused by COVID. You can blame it all you want on the initial lockdowns, but all you have to do is lift up your eyes a little bit and notice the comparative economic statistics with the rest of the world. More people live in the Eurozone than live in the United States, but in the last few months, only a few million in the EU applied for unemployment benefits, and tens of millions did in the United States, because countries where you had real, serious, uniform lockdowns that allowed the spread to be somewhat contained so you could implement the only serious solution that would actually let people resume normal life, which would be a national test and trace system, those places were able to reverse much of the economic damage caused by the virus in ways that the United States simply wasn't. That as a matter of fact, what we've seen in the United States has been a catastrophic handling of COVID, leading to catastrophic economic consequences that cannot be purely blamed on the lockdowns, as shown by comparing states that barely locked down, like Georgia, where I just came from, that reopened so soon that even Trump was critical of them for it at one point, to how other states that maintained lockdown measures for far longer were doing, and they did not, in fact, reap great economic benefits from that decision, because when people are worried that going out to eat or getting a haircut could kill them, kill grandma, even if you're young and healthy, could lead to permanent lung damage, then you're a lot less likely to do any of those things. I know I'm almost out of time, but I did just want to briefly address a couple of things that Chris brought up in his opening statement. On the question of foreign policy, for example, said he created peace in the Middle East and de-escalated tensions with North Korea. This second one is particularly funny to me, I have to say, as somebody who lived in South Korea for years, saw those tensions playing out for a long time, because Donald Trump ratcheted up tensions with North Korea to the worst point they'd been at any point before the Korean War, and then his winds shifted and he made peace overtures. Similarly, on the Middle East, Trump's assassination of Soleimani in Iran brought us closer than we've probably ever been to the brink of war with Iran. We have a peace. There's a peace deal between Israel and the UAE, which was not particularly a country that was in any danger whatsoever of going to war with Israel. But he's made the possibility of lasting and just peace between Israel and the Palestinians vastly less likely by doing ridiculous, provocative things like certifying the Israeli annexation of East Jerusalem by moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Final point, last few seconds I've got. I just want to say this, that I think that we all know that Trump is in fact quite divisive. In fact, a lot of Trump's more honest supporters will say that what they love about him is that he triggers the libs. He's so good at lib triggering. They like to see him mad. And so I'd say if you are considering voting for Trump, seriously think about this. How much do you enjoy bathing in never-ending culture war? Does anybody like that? Right? Is triggering the libs really a goal worth pursuing? I don't think so. But on vastly more important questions like the wages, the living standard of ordinary Americans, Donald Trump has been a disaster. And for that alone, even if he hadn't been president for the COVID crisis, that he mishandled so disastrously that 213,000 of your fellow Americans are dead, he would have to go.
Come on.
We'll jump into the open conversation portion. And so with that, thanks so much, gentlemen. Want to remind you folks, they're both linked in the description box right now if you'd like to hear more. And with that, we'll jump right into it. So thanks so much, guys. The floor is all yours.
Which one of us do you want to speak? I assume me, because...
Yeah, it would be your turn.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay. This argument, I don't really want to go into COVID, because this whole idea that Trump killed grandma, I mean, everybody knows that's totally disingenuous. Trump didn't make the virus. Trump didn't spread the virus. Trump didn't do anything to encourage the virus. He did a lot to try to curtail the growth of the virus. No one was ever going to be able to stop the virus from infecting people in the United States. That was never going to be possible. But I'll get into that in a second. First, I want to go through, you said a lot of things. You said a lot of words there. And I just don't have time to go through them all, but I will go through as many as I can.
Okay.
You did a lot of cherry picking.
I do want to respond to the thing about Trump and COVID, but we'll save it.
Yeah, I'll go back to that. I'll come back to that. Look, you were engaging at the beginning of this, talking about certain towns that didn't get manufacturing jobs back, certain data, certain industries, stuff like that. That's what we call cherry picking, right? You're well aware of that. You talk about, you teach debate, right? You know about this trick, right? You pick certain data points and you say, well, this wasn't perfect and that wasn't perfect. But the truth is that Trump did create jobs, and that Trump did increase household income, and Trump did bring back a lot of manufacturing. If he didn't bring back every single manufacturing job in every single town for every single person, that doesn't mean that he didn't do a great job, way better than Obama did.
That's what we call a straw man. The objection is not that
it's not a straw man.
It is. It's not. The objection that I'm laying out is not that he didn't bring back every single manufacturing job. It's that there has been, in general, no great boom of manufacturing jobs. In fact, a lot of the specific jobs that he specifically promised to bring back, exactly the opposite has happened. He said he was going to bring back the coal mines to West Virginia. Coal jobs in West Virginia are at an all-time historic low and were before COVID.
Okay, so you're judging somebody's promises generally on specific evidence. So you're saying that, okay, if you brought back jobs...
If somebody promises to do a specific thing and the opposite of that thing happens, that's not a promise that's been kept.
Well, it's going to be difficult for me to go through and discuss every single instance of every single manufacturing job. I'm just not aware of them all.
Oh, I mean, you don't have to talk about every instance of every manufacturing job. Has there been a mass influx of millions of manufacturing jobs of the kind that he said that he would?
I would say there has been a significant influence of manufacturing jobs, far more than I think. I believe Obama's exact words were, these jobs just aren't coming back. And that wasn't true. That wasn't true. Trump created 6.6 million jobs in his first 3 years. 6.6 million. That is a lot of jobs. Now, I don't know exactly how many of those jobs were specifically in coal or oil or the specific areas.
How about manufacturing in general? Manufacturing as a sector.
I don't have that number, but I know that it was significant. I've looked that up in the past. I didn't have time to look that up. But I will tell you this: a lot of the arguments you made were anecdotal. My mom, my dad, different specific people. That is the worst kind of argument. I understand that you're using that to illustrate your point, but it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't show anything. It just says there are certain people who are having a hard time, right?
Oh, it's illustrating a point. The point is proven with the statistical information.
But it's totally irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant.
Well, I don't think so. I think that making a point more vivid by
answer me this: did anybody ever have a hard time
One sec, Mr. Reagan. Pardon my interruption. Just to let Ben finish, and then I promise we'll come right back to you.
Okay. Chris Wallace. Zing.
Hey, the corresponding character in that night's events is the comparison.
I am Trump in this scenario. I will admit that. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that was widely seen as a good look, but
no.
But in any case, I was going to say, I think that if the vivid illustrations are used in place of data, sure, that's bad. if they are accompanied by data, like Trump saying, hey,
You didn't accompany by data. You accompanied by cherry picking.
It was not cherry picking. Trump
Okay.
said, this was something he said more than once, right? Oh, by ending the Obama administration's war on coal, we're going to bring those coal mines back to West Virginia. In fact, when he really did cherry pick and looked at a couple of specific mines that had come back, he said in November 2018, in the run up to that election, that he took credit for bringing back coal to West Virginia, even though by then the overall numbers of coal jobs there were at a historic low, thousands of jobs less than existed at any time in the Obama administration.
So you're arguing, we're having a debate here in which you're arguing that you wish Trump had brought back more coal jobs.
No, I'm arguing that Trump lied. Do I think, as I said,
no. Breaking a promise is not the same as a lie. Breaking the promise is not the same as a lie. I think you're aware of that.
I think that if you don't,
do you think he had no intention? He had no intention of bringing back coal?
Yeah, I think he had no. I think he did not have the slightest intention.
Well, that's a hell of an assumption.
Okay, well, I think it's a fair one.
What evidence do you have to support that? I know that leftists think that they're mind readers, but I'm curious to how you did read his mind.
Let's hear the answer.
Well, I don't think you have to be a mind reader. I think you just have to look at what he did. Did he actually do anything or even try to do anything?
Yes, it's called deregulation.
Yeah. Well, I think that if he sincerely believes that deregulation would bring back all those coal jobs, then he gets credit for honesty, but not a lot of credit for examining the evidence. As far as the other question you're bringing up, do I want there to be a bunch of new coal jobs? No. But what I said in the opening statement was that it's not some law of nature that the jobs at the coal mine or the steel mill or the auto plant or the good jobs and other kinds of jobs aren't good jobs. What actually made those jobs good jobs were these powerful industrial unions that have brought up wages. What I would like is to have a Green New Deal and create millions and millions of new unionized public sector jobs, converting us to a green energy infrastructure.
Okay, about unions, I don't want to get too much into unions, but I will say this. A lot of the reason why many jobs in America went away in the first place, many manufacturing jobs, were because of unions, right? I will grant you that unions have helped historically to bring people's wages up, but you've got a lot of regulation, right? You've got a lot of regulation to protect employees from dangerous work conditions, to have a minimum wage, this sort of thing. When the minimum wage was first instated, I think that the equivalent today would be like something like $5. I mean, it was unbelievably low, and it has slowly increased over time to a rate that is not sustainable for certain kinds of jobs, right? For certain kinds of jobs.
So if you're going to believe this, that the reason that those jobs went away was because of unions.
Some of the jobs, not every job.
Okay, well, you're going to have a very hard time, right? So, like, at the risk, at the risk of being accused of cherry picking, let's try to make this a little bit more concrete. I think about some specific examples, right? So, is the reason that all of those jobs left Flint, Michigan, for example, is that because of the UAW? If so, you have to explain why it is that the UAW was in place throughout much of the 1930s, all of the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and then its existence made the jobs go away in the 1980s. That's very easy. That seems a little implausible, whereas it's much easier to explain that.
It's an escalation of power.
By saying that what changed wasn't whether it was a union shop or not. What had changed was the international trade regulations that really greased the skids for taking them away, which, by the way, to get to another place where Trump has, to put it generously, because sure, who knows, we can't read his mind. Maybe at one point he did have an intention that he later gave up on, right? But one place where Trump's rhetoric conspicuously failed to match the reality was what's happened with trade. There's been a certain amount of renegotiation and bilateral trade agreements, but as far as the basic thing about those agreements that made them very much in the interests of corporations, very much not in the interests of workers, there has been very, very little movement there. And I think that when he said in 2016, this was all part of the same pitch, right? Because he would criticize the trade deals. He'd say he was going to bring the jobs back. The trade deal thing has happened to some extent. But I mean,
what are you talking about, Ben?
Most of what's wrong with NAFTA is wrong with the bilateral agreement, between the United States and Mexico. There's like anybody who ever had a problem with that, for all the good reasons that you'd have to be a problem with it, would be, let's put it this politely, underwhelmed by the replacement.
Okay,
one
fine.
second.
So,
Pardon my interruption. There's a small volume discrepancy. I just want to be sure that
sorry.
I think if we could maybe I didn't notice it. I actually checked beforehand, but maybe sometimes mics do weird things. If we're able to, Ben, if you're able to turn yours up just a bit, and Mr. Reagan, if you're able to turn yours down just a bit, it might bring us to where we're kind of back in balance with each other. And then also,
all right, how's that?
Bring it.
I think that's closer. And what we could also do is maybe just a really quick rejoinder from Mr. Reagan, and then I would definitely want to cover foreign policy, as we haven't gotten to talk about it that much yet. So it came up during the opening.
We're talking about foreign policy now. I mean, if you're saying that Trump doesn't negotiate good deals internationally, I mean, you can easily just point to China. I mean, he's been criticized like crazy for trying to put tariffs on China, right? There has been some pain even amongst some, industries, especially farming in the United States, because
a lot of jobs have lost, a lot of people have paid more, but yeah.
True. But the reason that he's doing that is precisely what you're talking about. It's so disingenuous what you're saying, because you recognize the criticism against Trump for forcing certain kinds of farmers to suffer under these negotiations with China, right? Although he did counterbalance that with some supplementary, help for these farmers. But to sit here and say that he's not tough negotiating internationally, but then to sustain that criticism against him is so ridiculous. It's just absurd. But let's move back to COVID, because you wanted to.
That's not the criticism. The criticism isn't about lack of toughness. The criticism
is
about whether. No, it's not, right?
Okay.
The problem with NAFTA, the problem with the WTO was never any lack of of toughness or the United States being screwed over by other countries or anything like this. The fact is, the problem is that these deals were negotiated on behalf of the interests of corporations in ways that were very bad for the interests of workers, both in the United States and in other countries.
How are they worse?
And when we look at the bad effects, I don't think tariffs are always bad. I think that you can do it in a careful way, in a way that makes sense, and it could sometimes be justified. But if we're going to be intellectually honest here, the evidence seems pretty clear that the Trump tariffs have not just hurt a few farmers; they have led to quite a bit of job losses due to the inevitable retaliatory tariffs.
Sure, but you know that the negotiations were stalled because of coronavirus. But the reality is that in the long term, having some tariffs to use as a negotiating tool free trade is amazing if both sides are playing fair, right? We know that China was never playing fair, right? So therefore, putting on tariffs as a negotiating tool was something that Obama, Biden, they never did anything like that. I mean, you tell me, okay, coronavirus, you say that Trump failed on coronavirus, which is totally nonsense.
Well, I mean, I think if you compare the numbers of the United States to the international numbers and look at the ranking, right, I think that we're something like in the top 10 countries in the world, not in terms of number of cases and number of deaths per thousand, which is why when you said earlier that, sure, Trump didn't create the virus. Ironically, by the way, Trump-style deregulation in China of the wet markets did create the virus by lifting the ban on selling wild meat. But whatever,
Trump does not control the regulations in China.
He doesn't. That's why I said style. But Trump, but sure, Trump. Yes,
such a weak argument.
Sorry, is deregulation good in the United States but bad in China? That'd be very weird. Or the laws.
So you're saying that all deregulations is the same across the board?
No, I'm saying that it is a little ironic in this context that the reason this happened in the first place was because of deregulation. But let's talk about Trump's response, because you say, sure, Trump didn't create the virus, and nobody is saying he did. The question is, has he handled the virus in ways that led to vastly more deaths than we would have gotten.
Yeah, and the answer is you have no idea.
And the answer is we actually do have an idea.
No, you don't.
Because of course we do. There's a very easy way that we can tell, which is that we look at the number of deaths per thousand in the United States compared to other countries around the world, and we could see that the Trump administration has mishandled it worse than.
Okay, so every single death is a fault of a federal law or a federal position.
The question isn't every single death. The question is, what's the overall rate of deaths?
Where are most of the deaths? Where are most of the deaths in America taking place?
Any given death.
The highest concentration of deaths. Where was it?
Any given death.
Come on, Ben. Let's be honest. You said intellectually honest.
Any given death could happen under, like due to 1,000 individual factors. But when we look at the rate of deaths, then you have to link that with the total absence of any kind of meaningful federal response, the total lack of any kind of attempt to encourage lockdowns that could have
not true. That was federal guidance, which I disagree with. That was federal guidance. Lockdown was federal guidance. What are you talking about?
Well, I think that if you're looking at whether Trump was encouraging or discouraging those, I don't think that you can just look at.
What are you talking about? That was federal guidance. He was encouraging them actively.
Do you think what I'm saying might be relevant to this point that you're making? That yes, after sustained criticism, after sitting on their hands as the virus spread and more people died, after doing everything possible to minimize it, in fact, admitting to Bob Woodward that he
closed travel to China when everybody else said that was racist.
Yes, that is the one read that Trump supporters can cling to because they know that
you just said he didn't do anything, but he did something significant.
He was actually, first of all, it's not significant. That's not where it was coming to the U.S. from for the most part. It was coming from Europe at that point.
He closed it from Europe as well.
They have
as soon as they figured out it was coming from Europe, they closed Europe.
So
what are you talking about?
Am I going to be able to say this or no?
Well, not if you just lie the whole time. It's difficult.
Well, okay. First of all, I caught you at about 50 lies in your opening statement. You'll notice I didn't correct any of them. Oh, I absolutely did. But they have but if we're going to talk about this, right, is issuing guidance eventually after a criminally negligent initial response, eventually grudgingly, after minimizing it, after admitting to Bob Woodward that he knew how much worse it was than what he was saying. You can compare what he says in that tape to what he said in public speeches, eventually putting out some guidance, and then very, very quickly, without using that as an opportunity to implement something like test and trace, very, very quickly reversing course and talking about and tweeting things like liberate Michigan, encouraging people who are doing things like an armed occupation of the Michigan state capitol. Yeah, I think that is a criminally negligent response. The fact that they eventually got around to issuing some federal guidance before very quickly reversing course is a pretty slim defense of an indefensible record.
Mr. Reagan, I can give you a short chance to respond, and then I would like to try, if we don't cover foreign policy, maybe race and violence in the cities.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll get to that right now, okay? That's a perfect segue, actually. I was going to cover some other stuff that he mentioned, but this is fine. We can get into this. So you're saying that because some people protested wearing masks and being in lockdown and that sort of thing in Michigan, that Trump caused all the deaths. You're completely neglecting.
That's not at all what I said. It's an obvious caricature, but go on.
Okay, an obvious caricature, fine. You're completely neglecting the fact that if you take out New York City from all of the deaths in the United States, all of the data all changes, right? All the graphs suddenly change.
Take out New York City, almost nobody died on 9/11. I mean, that's what
exactly right. But nobody blames any American leader for negligence for 9/11. Everybody's blaming Trump for coronavirus. But if you're going to blame a leader for coronavirus, you're neglecting Cuomo. You're saying that putting old people into nursing homes who had coronavirus, right? Which every conservative said, "What the hell are you doing? That's a disaster." Right. And Cuomo was like, no, it's fine. This is our policy. This is what we're going to do. Everybody's like, are you meant? Even at the time, people were criticizing it at the time. And you're saying somehow, though, but all the deaths in New York, though, that was all federal. That was all Trump's fault, even though his guidance was lockdowns. Biden wasn't saying, no Democrat was saying, we need to lock everything down. We need to lock everything down for like weeks or months or even days before Trump issued guidance to suggest that people should. Right? This wasn't like he begrudgingly did it. He did that very early on. And early on, we didn't know everything that we know today.
Like a miracle.
We didn't know everything that we know today. So to look in hindsight and say, oh, Trump didn't lock down every single business in January is ridiculous. Nobody was calling for that. What's her name? Friggin' Pelosi walked around Chinatown without a mask going, look, everything's fine here. Come to Chinatown, join us, enjoy this.
So I can see why you're changing the subject. Because
I'm not changing the subject.
When you're trying to defend something indefensible, then shifting
what
de
Blasio
was doing, and what Cuomo was doing, and what Pelosi was doing, those all make sense because you can't defend what Trump was doing when he was saying,
"What did Trump do that was so bad?
We'll be good by Easter. We can go back to church then safely. It's going to go away like a miracle." When he was on tape telling Bob Woodward that he was lying to the American people,
no, he didn't say he was lying to the American people. Look,
he was saying, "I always say it's not that bad, but it is actually that bad." You can compare what he was saying when he was comparing it to deaths from the flu with what he was saying to Woodward about just how much worse he knew that it was. And you keep doing this thing where
that's not true. He knew that it was a dangerous virus, right? But nobody knew how long it was going to last. He didn't sit there and specifically say all the stuff. Trump's not a doctor. He's not a scientist, right? He's not an epidemiologist. He didn't go in there to Woodward and give him a sort of fucking PowerPoint lecture and be like, look, this is how the virus reacts. This is what happens. He just repeats what he hears from the doctors.
So you think there was no gap at all between what Trump was saying in public and what he was saying to Woodward at the same time, even though part of what he said to Woodward was precisely that in his public statements, he was minimizing it?
No, because you can characterize, if you don't know everything about something, right, you can be optimistic about it or you can be pessimistic about it. If the doctors are telling you, we think it might be this, or we might think it might be this, and this, right? And they can give you an estimate. It might be this bad, which would be the worst possible scenario, or it might be this bad, which would be the best possible scenario, right? And you can characterize it in a way that you think is appropriate for how you want the American people to react. You don't remember people were buying up all the toilet paper. People were reacting in a way that was completely irrational to this virus, right? Buying toilet paper, how did that save anybody's life? That didn't make any sense, right? So Trump was taking the most optimistic approach in his address to the American people, whilst behind the scenes, there's this expression, this old expression, right? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, right? So Trump was trying to encourage people to have hope, right? And to encourage them to go about their daily lives in the most optimistic, positive way possible, because keeping up spirits is always good. Ask any doctor. Ask even an epidemiologist. Keeping up spirits is incredibly important. But at the same time, behind the scenes, he was doing everything that he possibly could to try to mitigate the spread of the virus. I think that is the most responsible, most presidential approach possible. And
everything
I would ask you, what do you think Biden?
What I would like to do is, I hate to jump in, but just because we've talked a lot about the coronavirus and we've talked some about the economy, it really would be a great opportunity to jump into one of these other topics, whether it be the kind of race relations that Trump...
All right, let me shift it to the race thing. Okay, so you said that you thought that the protests in Michigan were a problem, that Trump didn't condemn these protests.
It wasn't that he didn't condemn it, it's that he tweeted out, all caps, "Liberate Michigan."
Yeah,
it's
which I agree with.
The other night, he was talking about how Governor Whitmer wasn't grateful enough to him, and he was minimizing the terrorist plot that was just revealed by members of the most hardcore portion of his base to kidnap the sitting governor. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more than that. That's
an absurd. You're accusing me of a caricature to somehow tie Trump to a plot to kidnap Whitmer is ridiculous.
I'm not tying him to it. I'm saying that
you
have
are.
Okay. Well, look. Clearly, you can read my mind. So, I mean, we don't even need to hear.
No,
from
I'm just interpreting your word that you're saying out loud.
Yeah.
But look. Okay. But look. So you got this protest. you got this protest against the mask, against the lockdowns, which were pretty authoritarian in Michigan. You got to admit.
No, I
But
don't
once
actually
we
have to
have,
admit
once
that
we
at all. I
have,
think
once
that
we have,
they're
once we have
not.
Black Lives Matter come out, and they start burning down buildings, they start having these riots everywhere. Antifa, every leftist, Biden, Kamala Harris, everybody forgives that and calls them peaceful protests. And even if you're not having a riot, you are having a peaceful protest. Those gatherings are necessarily going to bring people out who are sick, necessarily going to infect people. But those are all perfectly fine. But anytime anybody from the White House, who, by the way, gets tested before every kind of meeting that they ever have at the White House, everybody at the White House, anybody who doesn't wear a mask is suddenly like trying to kill grandma. But the protests are perfectly fine. We are so obsessed with this insane racial nonsense in America.
So you notice what you just said, right? Anybody
Yeah.
who doesn't wear a mask
Right.
is trying
Vilified.
to kill grandma,
Yep.
or is appropriately condemned for recklessly spreading a
Why
virus.
appropriately?
Whereas when even when we're talking about
why appropriately?
about shoulder to shoulder indoor gatherings like the vigilante, like the armed occupation of the Michigan state capitol by domestic terrorists, that
You think everybody there was a domestic terrorist?
that is, yes, I think if you show up to a state capitol building waving around a gun, then that does seem to indicate an attempt to terrorize people to bring about political goals. But we're talking about
Nobody was waving any gun.
People who are not
I
wearing
didn't see
masks,
waving of a gun.
who are not wearing masks, who are shoulder to shoulder indoors. And then you're talking about people who are wearing masks, who are outdoors, and you're saying that the only possible reason why anybody might evaluate these two things differently is because they support one cause and they don't support the other.
Absolutely right.
When if you actually pay any attention to what the scientific experts are saying, there is a vast difference between being indoors with no masks and outdoors with a mask.
So you're talking about one protest, which was basically mostly outdoor, by the way. Mostly that was outdoor. Most protests are
hundreds
outdoors.
of people jammed inside the Capitol building.
How many protests? How many Black Lives Matter or Antifa
protesters
protests?
not wearing masks who were screaming directly into the faces of Capitol cops at the Michigan State Capitol.
This is again anecdotal, right? You're sitting here and you're talking about specific things that are happening with a few people, right? I'm talking about statistics, right? I'm talking about thousands of protests.
You haven't mentioned any statistics. What you said is that you somehow see a discrepancy between people criticizing maskless indoor gatherings
well, let's talk. Okay,
and
then let's talk about the details.
criticizing mask-wearing outdoor gatherings in the same light.
All right, I want to get off Corona anyway. You're being absurd. You're talking about one specific protest, and then you're comparing that to thousands of protests with many different kinds of characteristics across the country.
Do you think any of the anti-lockdown protests that most people were wearing masks?
Do I think any of them what? Oh, that any of them were wearing masks? Yeah, I think a lot of them were wearing masks.
No, that's not what I said. Do you think that at any of the anti-lockdown protests, most protesters were wearing masks?
Oh, I don't know. I wasn't there at those protests.
Okay,
were you?
Were you there at the Black Lives Matter protests?
I have been with protesters in Portland. Yeah.
Okay. So you've been to a couple of protests. They have the point is, I don't think this is controversial. Look, if you want to claim that most people at anti-lockdown protests were wearing masks,
I don't care about the masks. Masks don't work anyway. Masks are so stupid.
Okay. Every medical expert disagrees with you.
That's not true. That's not true.
That masks don't work at all, that they don't reduce the rate of infection?
Only from sick people.
Yeah, that is how infection works. That sick people.
So stay home if you're sick. That works a lot better.
Okay.
If you're sick, don't go out.
Except that many people don't know that they're sick.
No. Asymptomatic spread is not a thing.
Okay.
That was a mistake.
The approximate epidemiological equivalent of flat eartherism. Of course, asymptomatic spread is a thing for every virus.
It's very minimal. Very minimal. Incredibly rare. Look it up. It's incredibly rare.
I have looked it up. You are just wrong about this.
I am absolutely not wrong. Everybody who is watching this should look that up.
Yes,
asymptomatic spread is incredibly rare.
Please look that up. Ask a doctor. They will be horrified that you asked them. Of course, asymptomatic spread is a significant thing. And yes, of course,
every single study they've done on it shows it's incredibly rare.
This is a great opportunity.
Yeah. Sorry, it
too.
is.
I hate to do this, guys, but just
Yep.
because there are a number of topics, foreign policy. I know that Chris, you had mentioned in your opening that
Uh-huh.
allegedly Trump has brought peace to the Middle East in
Yep.
some degree or another. So that I thought would maybe be a good thing to talk about.
I'd rather go to the race issue. I think we've covered the foreign the foreign policy a bit. I mean,
I'm open to it.
I feel like I don't feel like I feel like Ben is going to say, well, no matter what good thing foreign policy Trump's done, it's not good enough. He hasn't done enough.
No, that's actually not at all what I've done.
Okay.
Although you've consistently claimed that I've done. What I've claimed, for example, that Trump's mishandling of COVID led to a much higher rate than there would be without Trump. You have caricatured that as my saying that every COVID death is due to Trump. When I've said that industries and states that he said they've gone back have actually gone in the other direction. You've characterized me as saying that I'm saying that Trump didn't bring back every single job. This is a straw man. I'm not saying that Trump is bad because he hasn't achieved 100% perfection. I'm saying that Trump is bad because he's made things far worse.
Well, okay, Ben, let me just say, I will never try to straw man you. I will always try to steel man your arguments. If I make a mistake in my interpretation, it's not intentional, first of all. Secondly, you do make more like specific kinds of statements, but then you use evidence to support those statements, which support other kinds of arguments.
The only statistics that have been mentioned at any point in the last hour have come from me.
Really? I didn't say that he created 6.6 million jobs in his first 3 years?
Okay, you said that, but the question was about industrial jobs. So yeah, that is
I have the
off
statistic
topic.
here now. I just found it. 440,000 440,000 manufacturing jobs.
That is a drop in the bucket of
True,
deindustrialization.
but it's
He
a lot more
says that
significant than zero.
that he's going.
Okay. Let's forget the jobs. We want to move on. So let's talk about this. We already covered that big time. Let's talk about this. Or I want to ask you a couple of questions. The basic question I want to ask
By the way, according to the CDC, the current best estimate of the percentage of infections that are asymptomatic is 40%.
Well, the WHO would disagree with that.
All
And
right.
every study ever that I've ever read about it would disagree
Okay, well,
with that.
all right. So the Centers
That's
for Disease
absolute
Control doesn't know what
nonsense.
they're talking
It's
about.
absolute nonsense.
What the CDC says is absolute nonsense.
Well, what the WHO says absolute nonsense? What every scientific
What
study?
does the WHO say exactly? Right. So because
Well, they said the words very rare, I believe, were the words. All right, look, I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to admit this. Trump is not perfect. He's not a perfect president. He's not a perfect man. There's probably a million things he could have done better, right? But the big question is, could anyone have done any better than him who is currently alive? And I'm not sure that's actually true. No, definitely not. But I would like you to tell me, right, what you think.
Some of the models suggest that 80 to 90% of the deaths could have been prevented by shutting down
models.
Earlier. Do you really think
one thing
that any other president wouldn't have shut down a week earlier?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And also, it wasn't Trump's decision to shut down, right? Trump had to give federal guidance, and then governors and mayors had to shut down, right? If you're going to put this on any leader, you have to put it on the governors and the mayors because they actually had the control of their regions. It was not Donald Trump. So if you think that we've done a terrible job with coronavirus, you've got to blame Cuomo, you've got to blame Whitmer, you've got to blame all these people.
No blame goes to the person.
How could it if he has no actual authority to shut anything down?
Well, first
if you think
of all,
shutdowns would have helped, which I don't actually think. I think he should have gone with the Swedish model and not shut anything down.
Okay, well, Sweden is in the very small club of countries they're actually doing worse as far as infections and deaths than the United States. Whereas
I'm not sure
if you look at the vast majority of countries in the world, almost all of them have handled it better than the United States.
No. The vast majority of countries in the world haven't had severe infections. If you're just talking about the countries with severe infections, the United States is somewhere in the middle. Sweden is somewhere.
Yes, how do you get to the point where the infections are severe in the first place?
I don't know. Do you know?
Yes, I do actually, because
So you think all the first world countries are somehow so inept that they're all infected, and all the third world countries, the countries with tons of poor people all gathered together, huddled together, they somehow are just like magically really good at dealing with coronavirus?
Well, actually, some third world countries have been good at dealing with it. Others have not. Like, for example, Brazil, run by Trump's buddy Bolsonaro, which again is in that elite club that's handled it even worse than the United
but
States.
The truth is, you don't actually know why countries are
less than 10
severely
countries in
infected.
the world. Well, actually, I think that the approach that's been shown to be most effective, and I feel for James because I know that he's trying to get us off this, but the approach that's been shown to be the most effective is serious lockdown. Use that time to set up a national test and trace program, which absolutely could and should have been done in the United States.
Completely useless. What about India? Why is India they're like one of the poorest countries in the world. Everybody's packed together all over the place there. Why do they not have a severe problem? What did they do that was so amazing?
Okay, well, actually, India had a really hard line national lockdown very early.
Could you get me coffee, please? Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. I didn't mean for that to be vocalized on the show.
No problem. James, what do you I feel bad. I know that
okay, that's true. That's true. We can shift.
We other possible topics, and some of these didn't come up in the opening, so I'm just throwing them out there. Election integrity, whether or not there is something to debate there. Maybe you guys are actually not particularly worried there.
I'm worried, but I don't think there's much to debate about it.
How about, let's see.
I mean, I think that there is something to debate in doing in the way that Republicans all around the country have been going out of their way to make it more difficult to vote, because they know that the fewer people who vote, the better chance their guy has. Hence, using worries totally lacking any evidential basis in reality about widespread voter fraud as an excuse to try to make it as difficult as possible to vote, doing things like having only one ballot collection site per county in Texas, where individual counties are larger than a lot of states are. I think that every time something is in contention in court around the country, where the two sides are disagreeing about some question of election law, it's always a matter of Republicans trying to make sure fewer people vote. It's harder to vote because they know that that's the way that Trump has the best chance of being reelected.
First of all, Trump isn't doing that specifically, so you can't blame Trump for that. Secondly, I do actually think it's better for Republicans if fewer people vote, generally. Not necessarily because of voters. I mean, I don't think voter suppression has anything to do with it, but I do think that people who are uninformed about politics should not vote. Right? If you don't take the time to actually inform yourself about the issues and figure out, where you actually stand, just voting because you think that it's your patriotic duty or something, I think is actually a terrible idea. And we should discourage people from voting if they haven't actually educated themselves. I don't think that we should create any kind of barrier to voting. And I don't know anyone who does. There's this myth that Republicans are constantly trying to create voter suppression, especially amongst Black Americans. This is just patently false. If you talk about like voter ID laws and things like that, efforts to stop voter fraud, which I think are totally and completely reasonable, and they have them in most other countries, first world countries. You need license to get on the plane, things like that, state ID. This idea that, Black people have a much harder time to get ID than white people. I mean, what the hell are they talking about? Well, what is that? I don't even understand that at all. Like, I mean, most of the people, when I go to the DMV, and granted I live in LA, almost everybody that works there is Black. So are Black DMV employees stopping Black Americans from getting ID all over the place? I don't understand this. Having an ID at a voting booth does not limit your ability to vote. It's insane.
Well, first of all, the whole point, the only reason, given the absolute lack of evidence for any sort of widespread voter fraud, that actually places states that have really tried to look into this and really tried to find every case will maybe get into the single digits of cases. So the reason for the ID requirements isn't to solve this non-existent problem. The reason is that anytime you can have any kind of hurdle, right? An extra form you have to fill out, an extra box you have to check, an extra anything that you have to do, that fewer people will do it as with anything, right? That they have that's exactly the kind of thing that Republicans will bring up when they are advocating like small business deregulation, because anytime that you're making people go through extra steps, fill out extra forms, etc., and the people who are the least likely to jump through extra hoops, well, first of all, the people who are least likely to have ID in the first place are people who are lower down on the socioeconomic spectrum, and those are also the people the least likely to have the free time and energy to jump through any hoops that you give them. But I am glad that you brought up the fact that there are so many non-white employees at the DMV, because while we're talking about efforts to make it harder to vote, even aside from the really obvious stuff, like what the Republicans are doing in Texas, and you're right, this is not Donald Trump personally doing these things. This is his party doing it throughout the entire country. But it is absolutely true that those good public sector jobs like the DMV or, say, the post office that Donald Trump has also really tried to undermine, have been massive drivers of upward mobility, especially for Black Americans, which is one of the reasons that it's so insidious that Trump and the Republicans want there to be less funding for those things and want to scale them back, and have even openly floated the idea of privatizing the Postal Service.
I think that would be fantastic. I think it would be fantastic. You're right. Here's the thing. There is no real reason why anyone shouldn't be able to get an ID, and the idea that Republicans are trying to suppress the vote of Black Americans is just an absurd lie. But I would say this. Most violent crimes go unsolved in America, right? There are lots of different kinds of crimes that happen. And some crimes have a high rate of closure, rate of being solved by police. And other crimes have a very low rate of being solved by police. A lot of crimes go undetected, right? Now, violent crimes naturally are going to be detected. Why is that? Because there's an obvious victim who is going to be outraged or upset by it and is very likely going to report it. We don't know exactly how easy it is to commit voter fraud. We don't have any idea how much voter fraud goes on that goes undetected. The fact that we detect any voter fraud is kind of impressive, actually. And because it's a very difficult thing to figure out. It's a very difficult thing to detect a lot of the time, given the methods that they use. If you don't know about the methods of voter fraud, look at a New York Post article entitled something like I was a voter fraud or something like that. You got to check that out. Fantastic article by somebody about somebody who admits that he was a Bernie supporter. He was a political operative, and he admits that he engaged in voter fraud. He talks about some of the techniques, and these techniques, you would not be able to detect them. You would not be able to detect the crime, and therefore a lot of these crimes will go undetected. You know how you could stop those crimes from occurring? Voter ID, right? So it's not about the evidence. I mean, there is evidence to suggest that some voter fraud exists, but it's about common sense. It's about saying, okay, this is a crime that's very difficult to detect. Voter ID would help stop this or curtail this. To just argue that against it because you're assuming that there's some kind of racial intention is an absurdity. There's no evidence to suggest that I want voter ID laws put in place because I hate Black people. That's just unbelievably stupid. It's a ridiculous, disingenuous argument.
Okay, well, first of all, note that at this point you're arguing with things that I haven't said. You're arguing with things that other people.
No, but these are the positions that are generally taken against us.
Have said. Yeah. But since you brought it up, right? What is the link there? Well, again, the people least likely to have ID in the first place are going to be very poor people. People who are not
which are mostly white, by the way.
Yes, are mostly white. But as you and I, you may recall, have discussed extensively in the past, that they are wildly disproportionately Black, mostly white, but wildly disproportionately.
Yeah, but we don't
Black.
count votes based on proportion of a population. We count votes in total.
But if you are doing something that's going to make it less likely that people in a group that is wildly disproportionately Black are going to vote, one of the reasons that would be very much in the interests of the GOP is because they know that this is one of the demographics that most overwhelmingly.
Sure, but you still have to assume the motivation.
I'm honestly not super interested. I think that in the motivation, I think that they would have to be very slow to not get that this connection served their interest. Perhaps they don't care about that, but I would think that they do. The point,
I don't.
I think that the question is okay. The question is it? The question is, how are we going to weigh this alleged problem of in-person voter fraud? That, you know, you have one anecdote in the New York Post, you have decades of attempts to study this and find cases that have turned up almost nothing. How are you going to weigh this against the fact that we all know that every time you put up a new hoop to doing something, fewer people are going to do it, and the fewer people who are going to do it are more likely to be the people who are poorest, oftentimes have transportation issues. We're talking about people who don't have driver's license in the first place, people who are likely to be working exhausting menial jobs where they're less likely to spend their free time jumping through your hoops. So if you know that a predictable consequence of making it harder for people to vote is that fewer of those people are going to vote, and what you have to weigh this against is the alleged problem of in-person voter fraud. Sure, is it possible that there's a plague of in-person voter fraud that just hasn't shown up in any statistical evidence that we have available? I guess. I mean, it's possible that there's an invisible leprechaun on the palm of my hand right now that's undetectable by any means that we figured out to detect right now. The question is, do we have a good reason to think that that's the case?
Well, the leprechaun's name is Gerald, and he's been spying on you for weeks. Okay, just putting that out there. Okay, here, what is the likelihood that it's going to significantly reduce the number of voters who desperately want to vote, but just can't because of
who desperately want to vote, or who would otherwise vote? Because those are two very different questions.
Well, I think this is actually critical, because I don't want people voting who aren't desperate to vote. I don't want people who are uneducated about politics and political issues to go vote. So I'm perfectly fine if there are certain people who would sort of cavalierly go vote just because, you know, it's easy for them. I would be perfectly fine. I would actually put it to you. Would you be happier if uneducated people who are uneducated about politics specifically and the issues, and they don't really know anything about the candidates and they don't really know anything about the issues, would you rather have them voting in America or not? Because they definitely help the left. They definitely help Democrats.
They don't.
No, they do. They do.
No, they don't. Because if you look at the actual studies that have been done on this, for example, I'm looking.
So then you should be fine. Then you should be fine with voter suppression. Then you should be trying to create voter suppression.
Well, notice that you're making a really crucial assumption here, which is that the people who are most likely to be deterred are also going to be uninformed.
Yes.
Whereas I think that's not true. I think that the people who are most likely to be deterred, what's that going to track if is not level of information, it's financial level. And you might say, oh, those two are probably going to be the same anyway. But that's not what the data that we have seems to indicate. So, for example, we all know that the Republican base tilts higher income than the Democratic base. Trump voters, for example, despite all the talk of the white working class and everything else after the election, tilted higher income.
Let me just jump in here for a quick second, because I want to make a distinction. I don't necessarily think it'll be poorer voters. I think that it'll be less passionate voters.
Okay, but if less passionate voters who have more free time, who have better access to transportation, et cetera, are going to be more likely to vote than less passionate voters who have to work all the time, who don't have as easy access to transportation, who don't have as much free time. So it's not that, we're getting the less passionate voters, we're getting the more passionate voters and not the less passionate voters. It's that higher up the income ladder, we're getting both the more passionate voters and the ones who are just barely passionate enough. But the lower you go down the income chain, the more you need to have a higher level of passion to jump through all these hoops. And it's not at all the case that poor voters are necessarily going to be less informed. So, for example, like I said, we know that
No, I agree with that. Yeah, but the more informed you are, the more likely you are to really want to vote.
Tends to tilt higher income. But I'm looking, and don't worry, James, I'm not bringing this up to redirect the subject.
Oh no, coronavirus! You got to bring up coronavirus.
But I'm looking, for example, at a headline here in the Minneapolis Post about a study showing that, I quote, people who rely on conservative media for COVID-19 news are less informed, more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. They're similarly.
What publication is that? What publication is that?
The Minneapolis Post.
All right, I don't know.
So
I'm sure they're leftists.
Well, okay, sure. I mean, that's an easy way to dismiss everything. But they have a and similarly,
I mean, come on, am I wrong?
Similarly, well, yeah, actually, you are wrong. They might be feckless, centrist corporate liberals, but they're certainly not leftists. But in any case, I think that there are also studies showing that people who watch Fox tend to be less informed, tend to do worse on simple multiple choice factual questions asked by pollsters.
That's actually not true. That's actually not true. You can look up. This is a Pew study that they stopped doing, I think, in 2013, or something like that. Maybe it might have been even earlier than that. They used to do this study on how informed voters are on the issues, and I think conservatives, beat liberals or leftists on literally every issue, I think, except one. I think it was something like ecological issues, environmental issues, things like that. But on almost every other issue, Republicans always beat, every single time they do one of these studies, always beat Democrats on their knowledge of the issues. So it's just patently false what you're saying.
Okay, what you just said is not true. So I'm looking, for example, at a digital journal article from a few years ago. It says, new study by Bruce Bartlett, a conservative economist, top official in the George H.W. Bush administration, and domestic policy advisor to Ronald Reagan, concluded that Fox News viewers tend to be less informed. And again,
what was the method of that study?
So the 18-page study titled "How Fox News Changed American Media and Political Dynamics." The proponents, and again, these people are conservatives, the proponents of supply-side economics, found that Fox viewers tend to be less informed about current affairs than people who follow other news sources. The study observed, sorry, I'm just scrolling down here, but obviously this is something that I just looked at, but this is not something that I was just guessing that I would find, right? I've seen this reported many times before. Now, maybe this is fake news from left-wing media sources, but it's certainly not a novel claim. There have been several studies over the years that have shown that Fox viewers are less informed than viewers of other kinds of media.
Fox viewers, it's so okay. The truth is that it is somewhat difficult to get accurate statistics in a basic search on Google, and the reason is because the vast majority of media outlets are left-wing. Google is left-wing. There is a lot of data suppression going on. There's a lot of information suppression going on by social media, by media outlets like the New York Times, who are becoming far more left-wing. And I asked Valeria the other day what percentage of Russians believed in communism, right? An obviously failed political system. And she's, back during the Soviet Union. And she said, all of them, they all believed that communism was the way forward. How could you convince an entire country that a political system that is destined to collapse, destined to fail, is the correct way forward? Well, the way that you do this is suppression of information. That is how you do it. Okay. If people only have a certain data set, if they only have certain information that they're getting, false information, bad information, and you're restricting all this good information, they have no idea what the other options are.
Yeah, I think that is a pitch perfect description of what Fox News is like.
Okay, come on. Fox News is like an oasis in a desert. All right, it's the only really mainstream media news organization that is even remotely right-wing. Every other media outlet is left-wing, and it may not be left-wing to your standards, but it is left-wing.
It would be left-wing by any standards. It might be socially liberal, right? But it's certainly not economically left-wing. It's certainly not left-wing on foreign policy. If you actually want to know what the biases of the media are, then a really good basic reading source would be Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's classic book, Manufacturing Consent, where they break down a lot of the numbers on this. But I think that when it comes to things like portrayal of American foreign policy and its victims, when it comes to when it comes to economic issues, left wing, not a chance. Now, if all you mean is not so, is socially liberal, relatively friendly to equality for gay people, probably vote for Democrats, sure, right? I think that describes quite a bit of the mainstream media. But I think that if you want to know where, and I think that it's gotten the media landscape as a whole has gotten worse because it's gotten because we're in a media landscape now where people can pick and choose a buffet of news sources.
I wish they could.
That confirm their own biases, and they don't have to expose themselves to news sources that don't. I think Matt Taibbi's book, Hate Inc. is very good on this. So it's very, very easy if you're a conservative to only consume conservative tilted news. It's also very easy if you're a liberal to only consume.
People are selectively biased. Yeah, for sure. But here's the question I want to pose to you right now, because I think this is actually very critical. Do you actually think that conservatives should be free to express themselves on YouTube, on Twitter, on social media?
Yeah, I do. I think everybody should be free to express themselves in those places. I think that the evidence for systematic suppression, particularly of conservatives, is overblown and depends on
overblown. I think overwhelming is the answer that you're looking for.
Extremely overblown.
Oh my God! Are you kidding me?
Based on wild cherry picking of the evidence.
I think you got to look into this. You got to look into this.
Trust me, I've looked into it. For every case you can come up with.
My case, I have been suppressed for months. Ever since I came out with my Gillette video, my numbers have been dismal. And in fact, actually, in September, I think they released me because my numbers are I think they like tripled or something like that in September. And and you know what happened in late August? Trump went to the FCC and asked them to look into regulating the social media companies, including Google, including Twitter. Google owns YouTube. And suddenly we find that conservatives are now a lot more free to express themselves. I think I'm probably still suppressed to some degree, but not like I was. I mean, the suppression was ridiculous. There's something called a click-through rate, okay? A click-through rate, impression by impression, right? So you have a certain number of impressions. That's the amount that Google, YouTube will show your videos to people, right? Like if you get shown, 100 videos, you pick one, right? However many people that video is shown to, however often they click, that's your click-through rate. So if 100 people are shown your video and 5 people click on your video, of all the videos that they're shown, then that gives you, a point of those 100. And I was getting click-through rates of something like 30%. Okay, 30%. And my videos were still getting something like 50,000 views. It was ridiculous. I had a friend who has a similar number of subscribers, and she would get 5% click-through rate, and her videos would get something like 200,000 views. It was ridiculous. Suppression was very obvious.
So far, you've talked about 2 individual cases. The question is, and honestly,
these are anecdotal, for sure.
I don't think. Now, I think that when conservatives put forward this narrative, I don't think they're being dishonest. I just don't think they know what they're talking about because they know.
Well, how then am I getting hundreds of thousands of views on a 7% click-through rate today when I was getting 50,000 views on a 30% click-through rate in August?
They know about their experience in times when YouTube, for example, has screwed them over. They know about.
I talk to leftists and they don't have this problem.
Okay, I think you don't talk to enough leftists. I think that if you want examples of YouTube deplatforming people, for example, there are tons of examples that happen on the left. It's happened to me. They have, of course. I think that there are cases. This is the part I agree with you on, right? There are cases where YouTube, Twitter, other platforms like this have deplatformed conservatives in ways that I find disturbing. I think that having a few giant for-profit corporations have this much control over the flow of information is a very bad idea. I guess if I were a conservative or libertarian, I think they could do whatever they want with their property, but I'm not. So I actually do have a problem with that. There have also been cases when they have done that to leftists.
I agree with that. I will say that.
Certainly not seen statistical information leading me to think that it actually happens mostly in the one direction.
Well, I didn't prepare for this, so I can't give you that, but I assure you it is mostly happening.
Okay, I don't think it does. I think that people have actually looked into this, have not come to that conclusion. But look, as far as the issue of principle, should platforms like YouTube have much less fuzzy rules, much more clearly stated rules that have much more due process to them? So you have to get a clear explanation, for example, if a video is taken down, that you have a meaningful right to appeal it, etc. None of which exists now. Absolutely. Do I think these rules should be a total free-for-all? You can post anything that you want. No, I think there are reasonable restrictions.
I agree with you.
But I think they should err much more on the side of freedom than they do now.
Yeah. So then there is at least one point in which you agree with Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is working hard behind the scenes with the FCC, with Congress, to try to convince or at least pressure or at least convince these social media companies to be more free or allow more expression on their platforms. So you do actually, you should then give Trump a little bit of credit then for pushing that, when I haven't heard a single Democrat come out to against these social media companies who are inappropriately suppressing speech.
Well, I think that what Trump has done.
Well, what would Biden do? Forget Trump. What would Biden do? What has Biden said on this? What has Biden said on this? What has Kamala Harris said on this? What has Pelosi said on this? What is the left going to do when they get into office to ensure that we have free speech?
Okay, two things. One, nothing. What is Trump doing meaningfully? Nothing. They have
Not true.
Absolutely true. They have and also, of course, the really absurd thing you just said was Pelosi, Harris, Biden, and the left. Get out more, man. Talk to some leftists. Ask them what they think about these people. You will not get rave reviews.
No, I actually agree with that. But if you're voting, if we're talking about who needs to be elected in November, I think you've just completely undercut your position, because those are the people that are going to be in control of the country if we don't vote in Donald Trump.
Yes, those are the people who can be in control of the country. And so the question is about the comparative choice, right? Which is what I've been arguing all along, that of course, I think Biden sucks. I tried very hard to stop him from getting the nomination, but elections are about comparative choices. And if we are going to compare what Trump has done in the last few years to what was being done before that, what would likely happen in a Biden administration, if your number one issue is looking at what's going on with YouTube. Do I think, by the way, that Trump is going to do anything that's actually going to get YouTube to do what I just advocated? Have clear, consistent rules with a clear appeals process, et cetera? Not really. I think that he's going to make a lot of noises about conservatives being suppressed, which, again, I'm not at all convinced that the evidence supports that as the predominant direction. But I don't think he's going to do that. But even if he was going to do that, look, is what happens on YouTube more important or less important than, forgive me, James, the handling of the coronavirus plague? Is what happens on YouTube more important?
I will give you this. The coronavirus thing is your best tack, but it's still weak.
Well, you'll notice it's not the tack that I started with. It's not even as astounding as I think it is that you're sitting here
funneling down into it,
saying with a straight face that 213,000 Americans dying. Would all of those deaths have been prevented? No. Would most of them have been prevented by a better approach? Of course.
No.
But I don't even think that's, you'll notice that's not even the issue that I've emphasized in my opening statement, right? The issue that I emphasized, the issue that I started with, was Donald Trump's assault on the institutions, the only institutions that have actually been able to raise wages, get better working conditions, give any kind of voice or power at the workplace to the American working class. And if the question is, am I more concerned with how easy is it to organize a union so you can make a living wage, so you can get proper PPE during a pandemic? Am I more concerned with that issue, or am I more concerned with what's going on YouTube? That's a very easy call for me.
At the end of the day, sorry, go on.
It might be a good opportunity to jump into the Q&A if you guys are up for it.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. I'll let him finish with that. Okay, it's fine. It's a very weak position.
Well, okay.
I think it's obvious to everyone it's a weak position.
Okay,
so
well,
I don't even think I have to respond.
I wish we could take an instant poll. That would not be my guess. You wanted to jump to questions?
Oh my God, dude, James, you'd have to have instant polls. You got to figure that out.
That's true. We could do that. I don't know if they're not
blaming
random,
Trump
but...
for the coronavirus is the weakest, most pathetic position you could possibly have.
Yeah.
Trump has done everything that he thought was necessary. Fauci was asked in Congress, what did Trump do compared to what the medical community had told him, what the experts had told him to do?
Yeah.
And Fauci was like, Trump did everything we advised him to do. So this idea that Trump doesn't listen to experts, that Trump didn't do things right.
Guy who works for him, guy who would lose his ability to have any control or guidance about this whatsoever if he were honest about this. That's about as shocking as a Soviet bureaucrat saying that the 5-year plan.
You think that Fauci has definitely criticized Trump? You think that Fauci is in Trump's pocket?
I think that there are limits to what he's going to say in those circumstances. There are limits to what
he was testifying to Congress. It wasn't like he was being interviewed in a softball interview. He was testifying to Congress.
But I think that there are limits on what anybody in his position are going to say under those circumstances.
Come on. Your response to this point is, I don't believe it.
All you've got is what Fauci says, and you're going to ignore the overwhelming evidence from the comparisons between the United States and Canada, the United States and the European
Trump is not an epidemiologist. He can only do what the experts tell him to do, man.
I think that it's overwhelmingly clear.
Biden was asked what he would do differently.
The U.S. response to coronavirus has been among the very worst.
Sure. Yeah, you can blame Cuomo for that.
Look,
Biden was asked what he would have done differently, and literally everything that he said in that interview were things Trump had done. There's no difference between what the Democrats would have done and what Trump did based on the evidence of what Trump did. What would they have done had Trump not been there? Probably a lot worse of a job. But it's impossible to know because they weren't there.
That's based on literally nothing. And if we look at the fact that with very few exceptions, fewer than 10 exceptions, every other country in the world handled it better, that is just a fact. Look at rate of cases.
You can't look at the United States as a whole. Look at the Republican regions versus the leftist
I hate to interrupt,
regions.
guys.
Let's do the Q&A.
Pardon my interruption, but just to jump into
it's the leftist governors. The leftist governors. It's their fault.
I love these.
If you believe that there are leftist governors in the United States, you live in a fantasy world. What do you say, James?
I love your guys' passion. It makes it fun. It makes it exciting. And so this has been a really, really enjoyable one.
Wait till you see the fist fight afterwards. That's going to be crazy.
That's right. It will be barbaric. But we want to remind you that both of our guests, Dr. Ben Burgis, forgive me, Ben, I think I butchered your name earlier. So sorry about that. And so thanks for your patience. And Mr. Reagan, both of them are linked in the description, folks, so that you can hear plenty more where this came from. And so with that, Net 7, we've got a Joe Jorgensen supporter here. It says, Joe, not Joe Biden. In other words, Joe Jorgensen. They say, dump Trump, vote Joe Jorgensen November 3rd, say no to democratic socialism, and no to, I'm embarrassed to say this, can you guys, what is paleoconservatism?
That means like Pat Buchanan style conservatism, like it's mostly as opposed to neoconservatism, like, people who are supporting the war in Iraq, things like that. So paleoconservatism is like the wing of conservatism that tends to be more isolationist about foreign policy, more
which I would actually say
immigration, etc.
Oh, I didn't
in
know.
some ways, yeah.
I feel like, is that the new slang now, Ben? I don't know. Okay.
No, it's not slang.
It's been around for a while?
It's been around for a while, but I feel like it hasn't actually been used nearly as much lately as it was back in like the early 2000s.
Oh, okay. Well, Okay, thank you so much for that. And Marcos Makoev says TVP. Check it out. Is this another slang thing? What is TVP?
That one
I actually don't know that.
Okay, well, I used to be hip. All right, Matthew W., thanks for your
I was never
question,
hip.
says, thank you, Mr. Reagan, for your vigorous defense of Trump. So you have a supporter out there, a Trump supporter as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Brenton Langle. Brenton, glad to hear from you. Brenton said, there is no major leftist media in America, Mr. Reagan. You only have Democracy Now! And maybe The Intercept. Most
Well, we're just
others
talking.
are
This is
centrist-
semantics.
Oh, one sec. They said most others
Sorry.
are centrist or far right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just perspective, right? I mean, any Marxist is going to look at the American left and say you're far right, but I mean, it's an absurdity. I think that I'll tell you what, we are a capitalist nation. So in the sense that if you want to look at full-on communism as the farthest left that you can go, then we're right-wing in that sense because we're not Marxist, we're capitalist. But typically Americans look at the left-right divide within the capitalist framework, and once you go past the capitalist framework into, say, these Marxist ideas, then you're going further left than most Americans accept as the left in America. But a Marxist will certainly be correct from his perspective or from her perspective in saying that an American, left-wing liberal politician is probably more right-wing in their minds than left-wing. But we're looking at two different scales. We're looking at two different scales.
Just
It's
one
your-
very
sorry,
quick
go
point
ahead.
about this. You don't have to go all the way to full communism to have the perspective that
I'm just giving a different measurement. I'm just giving the
well, sure, but here's a third measurement you could look at.
Sure.
Right? You could think about things like in countries like Canada, right? So as far as I know, is not a communist nation. Even the Conservative Party supports keeping their Medicare system, national health insurance, which is roughly what Bernie Sanders advocates in this country. In the UK, even the Conservatives have to at least say, even if they'll undermine it in various ways, that they support keeping the National Health Service, which goes way further than what Bernie advocates, to actually nationalizing the hospitals and having government doctors be government employees. So I'd say there's an international perspective, even within the boundaries of capitalism. These are all capitalist countries we're talking about, from the perspective of which the American Democratic Party is very far from left-wing.
Gotcha. And next, appreciate your question. This one comes in from Adam Friended, who says, I had a feeling
I have had a conversation with Adam Friended in the past.
I had a feeling you guys had
I have
a
no idea
run-in
who this
before.
is.
He says, why not limit voting to the smartest people? Smart people make the best decisions. That's why planned economies work so well.
Yeah. So I think Adam could have paid a little bit more attention during our conversation, and he might learn that the sort of Soviet model of marketless planned economy is not at all the sort of thing that I advocate. If you want to know what I advocate, you can read an article that I wrote a few months ago in Jacobin called "Capitalism Isn't Working," but what would a viable socialism look like, or something like that. But as to his other point about limiting voting to the smartest people, in fact, what I advocate economically is exactly the opposite of that, right? I want worker-owned firms where everybody can have a say, not just a few state planners. But as far as limited voting to the smartest people, I'd say that when we actually look at the history of attempts to limit the franchise based on some sort of test allegedly for intelligence, I'd say that that's not a particularly honorable history, not one that inspires confidence about what such a thing would look like in the future. And I don't even think that it led to the people who are allowed to vote being more intelligent.
Gotcha. And thank you for this question. This one comes in from Marcos McKeve. Let me know if I've mispronounced it, Marcos. Thanks for your question. Said, information suppression is going on by the United States government on whoever they want and upon what they want, not what you think.
I think I lost the thread.
Me too. I have no idea what that. So can you read it again?
They said, I'm just as confused as you.
Okay,
They said,
okay.
information suppression is going on by the United States government on whoever they want and upon what they want, not what you think. I think we have a lot of conspiracy theorists.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Marcos. We love you. I just don't know what you meant.
I'm sure what he's saying makes sense. The way it's sometimes you type something and it doesn't come out clearly. I do that sometimes.
Yeah,
I do that sometimes.
I'm sure we all do. Yeah. But I guess I'd say I'm not entirely sure what he's referring to with information suppression. Although this is as good a time as any to mention that if you are concerned about information suppression and freedom of the press,
sign up for Mr. Reagan on YouTube. Sorry.
Or take a look at the Trump administration's prosecution of Julian Assange, which is one of the most disturbing assaults on freedom of the press in a very long time.
I will stand up with you on that. I do think that Julian Assange does need to be freed, but I would not put that exclusively on the Trump administration, and I think you would agree with that.
No. Yeah. I agree.
Gotcha. And thanks so much for this question. This one comes in from RT96. RT says, 2012 study, people who get their news from Fox are less informed than people who don't pay attention to the news at all. Is that a real study?
I remember that. I certainly, look, I won't claim that I have done a deep dive into what the methodology was or anything like that, but I do remember seeing that back then, yes.
Fascinating. And
can you read it again? I didn't hear it actually.
They said study done in 2012 said people who get their news from Fox are less informed than people who don't pay attention to the news at all.
Well, I don't understand what this obsession is with Fox viewers. If you look at studies that talk about Republicans, right, versus Democrats, Republicans in every study I've seen are far better informed about politics specifically. Now, you'll find that leftists or people who vote Democrat tend to be better educated in terms of, specialties, things like that. They tend to be more doctors, tend to be more, people with advanced degrees, better educated generally, or in specific career areas. But when it comes to politics and political knowledge, Republicans win every single time. Hands down, no question. Every study says it. Look it up. Anybody who is curious about that should look that up.
All right. Well, I guess the Republicans who don't watch Fox know so much that they make up for all the ones who do.
All Republicans watch Fox. Let's be realistic.
And thank you for your question. This one comes in from Blue Heron. Good to see you. Said, Reagan, if the official election result is a Trump loss, will you accept the results of the election or help to keep Trump in power?
Yeah, this is kind of like this weird myth that Trump will refuse to step down if he loses. That's never really been Trump's position. Trump's position is that he is concerned that there may be voter fraud. And if the results indicate a Biden win, but there also is some kind of an indication of massive voter fraud or some kind of significant cheating in the election, then obviously Trump will take some kind of action to try to look into that between the time that the election takes place and the time that obviously has to leave office, which is in January, I think January 15th. So it's not that Trump has refused to leave office no matter what. It's simply that there is a concern. And this is a logical fallacy, which Ben Burgis can explain probably better than I can. But this idea that to say that I will not agree to do something is not the same as saying I will refuse to do something, right? So they're saying, will you immediately agree no matter what the if the outcome is that Biden wins, will you agree right now that whatever the outcome is, you will accept it immediately on election day, right? And Trump's like, I don't know yet. We have to find out. We have to see what happens. And I think that everybody would agree, Ben Burgis would agree, that if there is, some kind of obvious indication that there has been massive voter fraud, that whoever is in office should not concede immediately, concede the election the day of the election if there is some kind of evidence of that. So, I'll take Trump's position, every single day, and I'll defend Obama. I'll defend Biden. I'll defend Clinton. I'll defend anyone who happens to be elected if they don't want to step down, if there's an indication of massive voter fraud. But I don't think that there probably will be I think that probably if Biden wins, then it'll probably look like a fair election, and then in that case, Trump should step down. I don't actually think that's going to happen. I think Trump's going to win, but yeah, I don't. I think this is a non-issue. This is some kind of like myth to scare Democrat voters. A lot of points that Democrats make are simply to scare or outrage Democrat voters to keep them from thinking and to just keep you guys afraid.
So where might this myth come from? Could it be the fact that quite consistently when he's asked or when Pence was asked at the vice presidential debate the other night, would there be a peaceful transfer of power if you lost? They did not, in fact, say what you just said. Right? They have a.
No, they did say exactly what I said. They said exactly what I said.
I just watched this. That's not what Pence said at it. Right?
What did he say? What did he say?
He conspicuously spent 2 minutes not answering the question. There was a lot of that also from Harris. Don't get me wrong, right? But I think that was a particularly disturbing one, not to answer. And I think that if Trump had in fact said what you said, then it would be far less of a story. Instead, I think when asked like the easiest softball question of all time, right, which is if the election doesn't go your way, would you accept the result? It costs nothing. It does.
That's not an easy question. That's not an easy question. If you want to say what I just said,
yes, of course. They have. But I think that if you go back and look at those transcripts, I don't think that Trump is saying, I know for damn sure Pence didn't say the other night, well, I will unless there is clear evidence of massive voter fraud.
But Trump has said that in other interviews.
Although, of course, there's also the idea that there would be evidence of massive voter fraud is just nonsense. It's based
but hold
on
on, Ben, look, if you're looking at an array of answers, of responses, right, and you just ignore the in-depth responses and you only focus on the ones that look like he was equivocating or something like that, and you say, oh, because he didn't give full answers here, it's unclear, and you just ignore the clarifications that he's made. I mean, sure, you could make the case that Trump is, going to try to steal the election or not accept the results or something like that. But he has made his position clear in other interviews in depth that you're just ignoring those points. His position is basically my position. Look, you will acknowledge, I think, that Donald Trump isn't always as well spoken as as other politicians. He's not as well spoken as me, right? As I am. He sometimes finds it difficult to express specific ideas, especially in language that's understood easily by the media or by Democrats, right? Republicans tend to kind of get him. Right? They kind of understand him. And so sometimes other people need to clarify what he's saying, or he needs to clarify what he's saying specifically to reporters after the fact, after he's given his initial response. And he's done that many times. I mean, just look at the when he was asked about, can you tell the Proud Boys to stand down? First of all, Trump didn't know who the Proud Boys were. Secondly, he said the word stand by, right? Stand by. Now that could be interpreted in two different ways. You could say stand by means stand by, hold on, wait until you get my signal and then go. Or it could mean, that guy just stood by and didn't do anything where that woman got killed or something like that, right? So stand by can mean wait for my signal, or it can mean just do nothing. It was obvious to me and to every other Republican out there that he was just reiterating what he just said, stand down, in different language. But because stand by can be interpreted another way, the media twisted it. And that's exactly what's going on here. He's not always clear with what he says. Well, you have to be able to interpret what he's saying accurately.
Move to the next question.
I think you have to interpret it in light of his history of pretending not to know who bad actors who support him are, like most.
That's not true. Pretending again, you're mind reading.
No, I'm not mind reading.
To respond, Mr. Reagan.
Here's why I'm not mind reading. Because in 2016, when he claimed not to have heard of David Duke and the KKK, which is bizarrely implausible in the first place, you can find plenty of statements from before 2016 showing he had indeed heard of them.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he didn't say he'd never heard of them. He's just like, I don't know anything about those people. I'm not associated with those people, which is a totally natural response for somebody who genuinely doesn't have anything to do with somebody. Like he was going beyond saying I denounce them. He was saying not only do I denounce them? I don't know anything about them. I'm not even remotely associated. It's the when was the last, or did you stop beating your wife? It's that question, right? When did you stop beating your wife? Right? It's a very difficult question to answer. So Trump was always trying to just avoid, because you're making an association in the minds of people, right? Ben Burgis, have you stopped molesting children? Right. So now you put in the mind of people that Ben Burgis molests children. Right. That's a completely unfair thing to do. Ben Burgis, by the way, I don't believe molests children. I've never heard this accusation made. But see, now, which is it's kind of like a sick thing to do. I shouldn't have used that illustration, and I apologize. But the point is, making that statement puts it in the minds of people. Oh, this guy's a child molester. That's terrible thing to do by the media.
In any other context, you would interpret, I don't know anything about David Duke as I repudiate him so completely that I disavow having anything to do with him.
I'm saying Trump does not always express himself clearly, and that's a natural response for somebody who legitimately has nothing to do with these people.
I hate to do this, but Brenton Langle, thanks for your question, said giant corporations are not left-wing. You aren't a leftist if you don't reject capitalism and private property. Corporate media and big tech love both.
Sure. I mean, that's obviously the sort of Marxist position. It's basically the same answer I gave before. If you are so far left that you think every, Democrat politician in the federal government is right wing, then, I mean, it's just a matter of perspective. There's nothing. Most Americans don't agree with that.
It is a matter of perspective, but I'd also point out that even if we don't have the perspective of totally rejecting capitalism, that from the perspective of Canadian or British conservatives, the Democratic Party is not left-wing.
Let me just say this: it's a very weird argument. It's an unproductive argument to say let's try to redefine what the left is in America, right? I think. It's kind of pointless. I mean, I understand this concept of.
I don't think it's redefining, right? I mean, like we there was just a big primary, for the second time in the last 4 years, where there was a pitched conflict between the left wing and centrists. I think that we know what the difference is between them. I think kind of conflated those into the same thing. I mean,
okay, but Ben Burgis, you would acknowledge, I imagine, that the vast majority of Americans consider Joe Biden to be left wing.
Would the vast majority of Americans consider Joe Biden to be left wing? I mean, the majority of Americans support lots of policies that are to the left of anything that Joe Biden is willing to say.
Right, but I'm just saying that the language that we use defines Joe Biden as left wing in America, and so in order to try to say that, in fact, Joe Biden is right wing or Joe Biden is like, a centrist. I would also say he's a centrist for sure. But to say he's right wing or in some way, you are in fact redefining what left wing means in America in the minds of most Americans. I don't think that's productive. I think we can use language that everybody understands, to effectively debate these things without trying to just shift.
I think most people can tell the difference between, even without getting into communism or Marxism or anything like that.
Socialism versus mainstream Democrat thought.
I think most people can see the difference between.
Which is why I'm complaining about this attempt to shift the language. It's just silly.
Well, right.
We all know what we're talking about.
But I think that calling corporate centrists who are opposed to reforms so mild that they exist in most countries in the first world left wing, I think is itself a bit of a shift in the language, right? I think sure, if you want to say what we would consider to be right wing in America,
okay, well, we say socially left or something then.
I think socially liberal, but I think they're centrist. I think that's the appropriate term.
Next one, Brenton Langle strikes again. He says Trump is on record for trying to keep the danger of COVID from the public. His admin blocked issuing masks to every household. 45 is a mass murderer.
I don't know if that even deserves a response, but I'll try. I mean, there's always these claims that Trump's lack of action. I mean, I don't believe that masks are as effective as if you are sick, stay home, or wash your hands. I think those are the two things that we should have been telling people all along. We should have kept businesses open. So I don't even agree on the lockdowns that occurred or that government guidance was good. But that said, a lot of people believe in masks. They make people feel better. A lot of people, that's for sure. And
Also greatly
the
reduced infection,
Trump's administration,
consensus there.
Trump's administration has actually issued, I think, 125 million masks to public schools. I mean, there has certainly been a massive federal attempt to try to combat this and try to, masks aren't like, why would the federal government distribute masks to every household? Masks cost like $1 or something like that. It's like,
Next
that's a pointless position.
Sleepy Dan.
So if it costs $1 each, it'd be a hell of a lot cheaper than a lot of things that they've done when they, for example,
How much is a box of masks, sweetheart?
like bailed
How much is a
out
box of masks?
the cruise line industry, for example. And there are other countries like Taiwan, for example, the Ministry of Health mailed a mask to every single Taiwanese citizen. And if you accept
Sure. It makes it look like they're doing something.
Yes, and they are doing something according to the scientific consensus that masks do, in fact, reduce the rate of infection, which, remember, according to the CDC, you said there's some WHO figure you don't remember, but according to the CDC,
No, it's not a figure. It's not a figure.
40% of COVID infections are asymptomatic.
That's just absolutely false.
That is what the CDC says. Maybe you know better than them, but that's what
I do.
The
I
original.
definitely do.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. Next, this one comes in from Sleepy Dan, who says Democrats called Trump's early travel bans xenophobic and racist.
Exactly.
We could have lost so much more time or so much more to COVID without them. Gaslighting at its worst.
Yeah, I understand why Trump supporters cling to this like the last little.
I don't get it. He took action. What is clinging to?
In a crash boat.
I don't understand how it's clinging to, though. It's taking action early.
That they can cling to claim that Trump was actually on top of this when everybody knows, certainly polls show, most Americans know, common sense tells us, the facts tell us that the Trump administration response to this has been a disaster. Now, it certainly is true that a lot of the rhetoric about China was xenophobic. It's certainly true that China, in many ways,
How was it xenophobic? Explain that to me. I want to know what that means.
It's certainly true that the selective focus on China was beside the point, largely as far as stopping the spread, given where most of the infections were actually coming from at that point. But saying, there were Democrats who criticized him for doing this one thing. The question is, why did he drag his feet for so long? You could find, yes, lots of Democrats who I think deserve lots of criticism for dragging their feet, not as long as he did. And why is it that there was no attempt to do what we know is the only serious solution, to do a serious nationwide lockdown, could have proposed legislation not to do that, absolutely would not be unconstitutional, and use that lockdown as an opportunity to implement the kind of test and trace regime.
Yeah, hindsight is 2020. Okay, let me read real quick. Let me read
this. We have so many questions. I hate to say that we really probably should just do one response per question. Yeah. Given that one was for Ben, I think it's a good chance to move to the next one. Anthony M. says, would either of you advocate for using phrenology or augury to determine voting eligibility?
Isn't phrenology like the study of the human skull?
Right. And augury, I think. Go ahead.
I don't quite understand the question. Is it a joke?
I think he's being snotty. He's talking about restricting voting to more intelligent people.
I think there's this confusion about when I say educated people should vote and uneducated people should not vote. That doesn't mean smart people should vote. That doesn't mean smart people should vote or stupid people shouldn't vote. I don't think there's a really good way of determining how smart somebody is or how stupid somebody is. I've met plenty of people that went to Berkeley that are complete idiots. I've met lots of people that never went to college that are brilliant. This idea that, I mean, if everybody's going to take an IQ test, I suppose we could determine it that way. But that's a little bit eugenicist, I guess. No, I have no interest in determining somebody's IQ or intelligence with regard to voting. Sometimes smart people make the worst decisions. I'm specifically advocating people who have educated themselves on the issue. You would not want a plastic surgeon to, perform an appendectomy on you. You wouldn't want a mechanical engineer to come in and provide medical care. This might be a very smart person, but if they're not educated in the specific area in which you need them to be educated on, you wouldn't want them working in that area. In the same way, if there are people who know nothing about politics, you got a lot of these 18-year-olds that are like Black Lives Matter activists. They really don't know anything about politics. You ask them about the issues, they know nothing, and they're going in and voting.
This is not at all an argument I would make. I don't believe in any of this technocratic stuff. I think that most political conflicts are about different economic interests and ideology rather than level of information. But I do find it kind of funny that what Chris just said sounds to me an awful lot like an argument that we should be ruled by career politicians rather than.
No, Ben, I'm not suggesting in any way.
Guys from New York.
What are you talking about? I don't understand. I'm not saying that people
because these comparisons you're making about expertise certainly make it sound like you're saying that political decisions are best made by people with relevant expertise. Which would
relevant knowledge.
Okay.
Relevant knowledge.
Well,
you don't have to have experience. You don't have to be
Mr. Reagan. And then we got to move.
I'm talking about voters. I'm not saying that there should be laws implemented in any way whatsoever. I think that people should be encouraged to vote and educate themselves, and discouraged to vote if they refuse to educate themselves. I think that that's a totally reasonable position. I don't know how anybody could disagree with that.
I hate to do it, but we must move to the next one. We had Sunflower, who said, does the left exaggerate certain things that Trump does simply as symbolic or harmful or regressive ideas, even though they're ultimately inconsequential?
Yeah, I think there are cases in which, some people on the left, but certainly liberals, again, because I would make that distinction, have hyped up relatively inconsequential Trump decisions. I think that certainly happens. But I also think that the opposite happens, that there are things that Trump does that are massively damaging and destructive, like the labor rulings that I started out talking about that get almost no play in the corporate media.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And Stupid Whore Energy, as she likes to go by, says most of Trump's...
Mom, you're posting stuff on here? That's surprising.
She says most of Trump's debate claims about mail-in voting was false. The dude is clearly trying to manipulate the election unethically.
Say that one more time.
She said,
I was thinking about my mom joke, and I was very proud of myself. Sorry.
She said most of Trump's debate claims about mail-in voting were false. The dude is clearly trying to manipulate the election unethically.
I think that's a huge assumption to make, right? If you have a concern about voter fraud, what's the evidence to suggest that that's somehow going to turn into a manipulation of the election? That's you have to. A lot of people definitely think that Trump is corrupt and they hate Trump and blah 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 blah. If you think Trump is evil, if you hate Trump, you're going to interpret everything he does through this lens. You're just going to assume that it's all a manipulation to do something nefarious and evil. But what nefarious evil thing has he done since he's been elected? What illegal thing has he done? What criminal? What nasty political tactic? I mean, the left has taken every nasty political tactic you can imagine. They impeached him for a phone call in which he did nothing wrong. I mean, there's all these nasty things the left has done. Trump has done nothing. There was all these accusations that when Trump is going to get elected, he's going to declare war with North Korea. He's going to destroy all of our international relations. He's improved just about every possible aspect of American standing in the world, improve the economy, right? Of course, coronavirus crashed all that, but he'll do the same thing again when he gets elected again. I don't understand this concept of Trump's corruption when no corruption has ever been shown whatsoever. There's just this, it's bizarre. It's like people saw the assumptions that were going to occur in 2016, saw that they did not exist. Trump is in fact not corrupt, but the left in fact was. And now they're making the same claims now, even though they were all disproven in 2016. It's bizarre that people think that he's so evil. Sorry.
I hate to pardon.
Yeah.
Just Soda Cabbage, don't worry, we got more for you. Says maybe Trump supporters and Mr. Reagan mirror their opinions onto Trump as, quote, what he means was, unquote.
Well, possibly. That's possibly true. I may be misinterpreting Trump, but I don't think so.
Gotcha. And with that, just give me a sec. I'm going to load this up. I think we had a couple of other questions come in. Want to remind you folks, both of our guests are linked in the description. So highly encourage you. You can check out all of their content at those links. And want to jump into this next one. This one comes in from Bartos Diagos. Appreciate it. Said, Ben, the media is fake. ignorance will be the USA's demise. Look for more from the right to the left side. Greets from the Netherlands. Thanks so much.
True. I love that guy.
Okay, I'm not even sure I understood what he was saying, but I didn't catch a question, so I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's true. A lot of times for super chats we allow people to make a comment toward the speakers that they would get a chance to respond to. So you're right. This is like not a question. This is more of a broad statement. Let's see. But one thing I didn't understand is they said look more from the right to the left side.
I didn't understand the second half, but I like the first half.
Well, I think with regard to the media and its biases, I said my piece, and then I didn't quite understand where it went after that.
Next up, last question we have here. Brian F., thanks for your question, said, overall, do you guys see the left or right trying to take away the freedoms from U.S. citizens, and why?
Ben?
Well, I think that depending on which freedom that we're talking about, I think that some of our most important rights are rights in the workplace, which is where we spend half of our waking hours. And I spent a lot of my opening statement.
You are so old school socialist. It's hilarious.
Going through a litany of ways in which the Trump administration has undermined the rights and protections of working people.
Give me an example.
Really? Okay.
One.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. So we can look at, for example, the COVID era, NLRB rulings, where it's Trump's NLRB has ruled that employers are not obligated to bargain over paid sick leave and hazard pay. This is in places that are already union shops. Employers are also free from having to bargain over a temporary closure. And most disturbingly, the Trump-appointed board has declared that speaking out against your company's COVID safety procedures is not protected speech. In other words, you can be fired for raising concerns during a deadly pandemic. This is in addition to what I mentioned earlier about using COVID as a pretext to stop elections, to certify new unions. This is in addition to rulings from Trump's NLRB that, for example, when you have public spaces that are still part of an employer's property, like the area outside of a grocery store where you might see the Salvation Army, in the past, unions had to be allowed to use those public areas that were open to other groups in order to give workers information about, for example, a union they're trying to organize. That's no longer the case. Another example would be a Trump executive order about federal employees, making it harder for shop stewards to file grievances. So yeah, there's a long list of these things. Also, if we're going to look outside of the workplace, already mentioned Julian Assange, where I was very happy that that Chris agreed that is indeed very bad. What's happened there?
I'm not sure Trump is actually aggressively pursuing that. That was an Obama situation.
Well, the Obama administration actually made the decision not. I mean, they did tons of things in this area that I strongly disagree with. No question about that. I think in a lot of ways it was very, very bad on the national security, civil liberties stuff. But they did make the decision not to seek extradition of Assange on these charges, which doing so dramatically undermines freedom of the press. If you can go after a foreign journalist for encouraging the leaking of information that's classified within the United States, that really, really undermines our ability as Americans to find out bad stuff that our government is doing that we might want to look at. So I think that those are both areas in which the Trump administration has really undermined our freedoms. I also think that the encouragement of really heavy-handed responses, I'm not talking about riots and looting here, but to, in the overwhelming majority of cases, peaceful protests, which has included lots of attacks on journalists by riot cops, and the way the Trump administration
by rioters, I think you mean
by riot cops,
by rioters.
That is not at all what I mean, Chris. They have
I have friends that are in there getting physically attacked by rioters.
Okay, So both things can be true. That there are in fact cases where where
I don't think
rioters
that was
have
intentional.
have attacked journalists. There are tons of cases.
I don't
where
think that's completely
cops
irrelevant
and the
anyway.
National
Trump isn't
Guard have
going out
attacked-
physically
have-
attacking the media
Well, no,
for
he's sending
covering
the
the
National
riots.
Guard to do that. But in
No.
any case, I think that as in many areas, I think when it comes to national security and civil liberties stuff, I think Biden is nothing to write home about. I think Trump is a disaster.
Okay, let me answer this in 1 minute. You took, I think, 16 hours to answer that question. I will
correct.
just really quickly. Okay, that was very convoluted.
Oh
and
shit! I got another 16 hours in me. All right. Sorry.
I don't think that was particularly convincing. I think that
Okay.
nobody really thinks that Trump is trying to dismantle any, fundamental American rights, but the left definitely is. They're going after your freedom of speech, right? We know that we're censored on every kind of social media. The left doesn't care about that. They're going after our gun rights. Everybody knows that. They want to undercut the Second Amendment completely. They want to undercut the Second Amendment completely. They're going after our religious. They're going after our religious liberties. They're going after our religious liberties, but only for Christians. Only for Christians.
Nobody's going after Christians' religious liberties.
False. In
is
California.
bizarro world.
Can I finish? Can I finish? I'm speaking. I am speaking.
Okay,
So that was my best Kamala Harris. That was my best Kamala Harris impression.
You're right. I'm being.
I can't believe a white man is trying to mansplain to me. This is ridiculous. No, in California, they're actually trying to dismantle our civil rights protections, specifically so that they can bring back affirmative action laws, so that they can aggressively try to oppress white and Asian people in terms of like going to schools and things like this. Bring back things like quotas. It's bizarre what they're trying to do. They're trying to end civil liberties on the left. It's the number of rights that they're trying to take away from us from the left is absurd.
There's paranoid hysteria. There's really bad paranoid hysteria. There's
this is real stuff,
white people are somehow oppressed in the United States. I mean,
systemically.
Wow. Okay,
Well,
that's fascinating.
We had one last one come in. Blue Heron, thanks for your question, said, N16, Trump claimed millions of people voted illegally. I think they meant like in 2016. And then he said, do you believe him? Is that the kind of evidence you need before supporting Trump staying in power?
I think that was hyperbole.
Gotcha.
I think he thought a lot of people voted illegally. I don't think he knew what the number was. I think that was just sort of a hyperbolic expression. Yeah. That's the kind of thing where people, when Trump was running, this was before he won, and there was this big movement toward Trump. A brilliant reporter, I forget what their name was, but they made the observation that Trump supporters take Trump seriously, but they don't take him literally. And the left takes everything Trump says literally, but they don't take him seriously, right? There's a lot of misinterpretation of what Trump says because Trump doesn't speak like, especially clearly all the time. And I accept that is a problem with Donald Trump, but it's not. I think that is absolutely critical that reporters and the press try to find what the actual, the most appropriate interpretation of what Trump's saying is, instead of the least charitable interpretation of what Trump's saying is, because that's what they do every single time. And it creates an incomplete and inaccurate picture of what Trump is about and what he's saying. And I actually think Ben Burgis, I think you would actually agree with that to some degree.
Do I think that Trump is
that the left wing media or that the media
speaks in a barely coherent stream?
No, that's not what my question is. I'm talking specifically about how the media interprets uncharitably what Trump says in every instance they possibly can. I think you agree that's true.
I think that there are cases in which there are statements that that have been overblown. I think that's happened.
Misrepresented.
I think that it's also happened that there are many times that he'll say crazy things and Republicans will scramble to try to find some what he really meant is, and oftentimes there's a little whiff of Mott and Bailey, which is where you say something to try to be provocative, and if you're challenged too much on it, you can retreat to, what I actually meant was, and that if you're actually that bad at communicating that this is something that comes up constantly, then perhaps president isn't the ideal job for you.
I do think it comes up occasionally, but I don't know if that is a defining characteristic of Trump. I think more often he's misinterpreted than he employs Motte and Bailey, which I do agree that he does do. He will say something that's explosive, provocative, meant to get some attention in the media. But I do think more often the media just intentionally misrepresents what he's saying.
We should probably, if it's a decent time to wrap it up. I know that Ben is in Michigan. You're in Lower Michigan. Are you guys in Eastern time or Central?
Oh, we're in Eastern time.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, getting pretty late. And then Mr. Reagan.
I'm good. I don't know what your guys' problem is.
Sir, are you in California? Is that it?
I am. Yeah, I'm in California.
Good for you. Well, so what we'll do is want to say I enjoy these guys so much, folks. So I encourage you, check out their links below. They are just, this has been so much fun. And so want to let you know, reminder, folks, you are welcome here no matter what walk of life you come from. We really do appreciate you hanging out with us. And so again, want to say a huge thanks to our guests, though. Thanks so much, Ben and Mr. Reagan, for being here with us.
All right. Thanks, James.
Thank you, guys.
My pleasure. With that, folks, keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care and have a great weekend, and we'll be back tomorrow night.